The Democratic Alliance Leader John Steenhuisen says President Cyril Ramaphosa and his ministers are out of their depth and have completely lost control of Eskom. Steenhuisen has also called on for the removal of Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe and the disbandment of the National Energy Crisis Committee. To speak more on these proposals now, we speak to the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, who speaks to us from Cape Town. John, good morning to you and thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with what is happening today, but I want to start off with that conversation we had with the Public Enterprises Minister, President Gordon, yesterday. He told us that certain units, or perhaps management, the divisions in the management at Eskom, we could see some changes there in the way of, quote-unquote, bolstering the management. When I asked him about the board, he said, well, that's work in progress. Do you foresee any immediate changes coming out of this cabinet meeting that sits today?
Well, I think probably what we're going to see is more of what we've seen over the past 12 years, is a new plan, new people, new faces and new promises. But the reality is that we've not got to grips with this problem over the last 12 years, that the same people are still sitting around the same table making the same bad decisions, that there's a political turf war going on between the Public Enterprises Department and Departments of Minerals and Energy, and that we need to get through the promises and start seeing some delivery. Bear in mind, President Ramaphosa, in some form or other, has been in charge of the Eskom turnaround for the last 12 years. In 2015, he promised us that in 18 months we would forget we'd ever had a problem with Eskom or load shedding. And here we sit now for the second time with stage 6, rolling blackouts, factories closing, jobs being destroyed, and people's lives businesses being severely disrupted. And it's for this reason we've called for an independent electricity expert or energy expert to be put in charge of the process now, because clearly plan after plan is not working. We need to do something different.
Yeah. You have called for Minister Gwede Mantashe to be fired. Some people out there will probably ask, why him and why him alone, when the minister charged with seeing Eskom that it performs at its optimum is President Gordon, who has sat comfortably with a board that's incomplete and experts saying that it is lacking in engineering expertise. Shouldn't he get the boot?
Well, if you'd watched the press conference I did yesterday, I indicated very clearly that he should also be sent packing for precisely those reasons. Why Minister Mantashe? Well, because he's responsible for the macro environment of energy provision in South Africa. He's been a significant obstacle over the last decade to independent power producers. He has an obsession with coal. He has made it very, very difficult for municipalities to be able to procure independent power directly. And had all these things been done over the course of the last 5 to 6 years, we would not be sitting in the situation that we are now. Bid window 5 is busy floundering. You've got Minister Patel, who's now trying to insist on a 35% localization, completely oblivious to the fact that we're sitting with an energy crisis here. This isn't a time for ideology. It's a time for us to get power into homes, businesses, and factories so that we can power up our economy.
John, the President announced an energy master plan in July, and those in his office are already starting to talk about that plan being implemented, namely that there are experts now who are being brought in to assist, but also the approval of the emergency power of at least 1,000 megawatts. Some people are going to say, well, here is the plan. What is the DA's concrete plan if you disagree with what has been proposed?
We don't disagree with what's been proposed. If you recall, we actually supported the plan when it came out. The problem, like so many other things with government, comes down to the implementation. We've been running an implementation tracker since July, and not one of those key areas has been met, mainly because there were no time frames and no concrete targets that were laid out in that plan. One of the reasons that we said we need an independent energy expert in charge of the process is that they would very firmly then have to set time frames and deliverables and make sure that those are met. You can't keep a plan as an open-ended one and simply hope for the best. Hope is not a strategy to get us out of the situation. What is needed now is expertise, set deadlines, and clear deliverables. And all of those people who are getting in the way of that need to be moved out of the way. We need to have a ring-fence state of disaster, which we proposed, around electricity, so that the Eskom and the other IPPs are exempt from some of the more ridiculous red tape aspects of procuring energy, and being able to focus on one thing and one thing only, and that's how do we get power back into the grid, and how do we ensure that load shedding is a thing of the past. That should be the only priority right now.
John, if you agree that at least in the immediate future, we are not going to see any major changes in terms of load shedding. Yesterday, you correctly pointed to a change in the language of the Eskom management. They're using words like catastrophic, which is quite sobering. What are you seeing in the horizon? Do you think that we might see a situation where we're going to move beyond stage 6?
Well, I certainly think that that is absolutely a risk. And I think that when Eskom executives start to move to language like that, I think it is a sign that things are not well and that there is a risk of potential further rolling blackouts. But that's exactly why, Tolly, keeping the same people around the table, making the same decisions and expecting a different result is the height of insanity. And it's why we've said get rid of this council, bring an energy expert and allow that person, he or she, to build a team of engineers and experts around who actually have experience in the energy sector to be able to refire up the grid and to get the electricity into it. I don't buy anymore the promises that are given, SONA after SONA, crisis speech after crisis speech, that just around the corner the solution is there. Just the next few months, be patient, we're going to deal with this problem. It's been now, there's children in this country that have grown up only knowing rolling blackouts. They've never known a time when we had full-time electricity. And this isn't some abstract concept. It's a basic fundamental building block for any country and economy. We can't go forward without a stable, reliable, affordable electricity network. It lies at the very heart of any investor's assessment of the country. So expecting different results with the same people making the same empty promises, I'm afraid we're going to be stuck with this problem going forward. That's why we need to do something completely different. Cut the politicians out, get engineers in, put an engineer in charge of the process, let him or her build a team of professionals, and let's get to grips with dealing with this crisis outside of the ideology, outside of the political hurly-burly, a sole determined focus on getting electricity back into the grid.
Final question, John, and I bring you back to what is happening today, and that is that virtual cabinet meeting. First of all, what should the president be saying coming out of that? You have already expressed your disenchantment with what is likely going to come out there. Well, I suppose skepticism is the correct word to use here. But also importantly, do you think that South Africans should still take to heart what the president says?
Well, it depends what he says. If he comes out and tells us that he's still using the same dinosaurs that have been part of this process for the last 12 years and expecting them to move the needle going forward, I think that he will be treated with skepticism. I think people and South Africans are sick and tired of the empty promises. I think they're sick and tired of committees and task teams and working groups and talk shops. They want to see the lights on. And there's only one way to do that, and that's to cut through all this nonsense. And if the president, there's no harm and no shame in admitting that, look, what we've tried to date has not worked. We've got to do something different. In fact, I think South Africans would welcome a candid, honest assessment of where the failures have been and a decisive plan about how we're going to get out of it. But if we're going to come with more talk shops, more of these crisis committees, etc., I can tell you, Tolly, we're going to be sitting having the same conversation in 3 months' time when we hit stage 6, or even 7, or even 8.
I'm letting you go, John, but let me put this final one. Do you give any input at all at this Eskom crisis committee that you say should be disbanded? But also add to that question what your counterpart in opposition benches is proposing, or at least are suggesting, and that is that Eskom is being deliberately made to fail in order to privatize it. That's the EFF. Your thoughts on those two elements?
Well, look, I mean, if someone's deliberately setting Eskom to failure, I mean, it would be absurd for government to be doing that, because clearly this is not a vote winner for them, rolling blackouts. It's certainly not an election platform you want to go into. I would say that Eskom is failing, and it doesn't matter who you put in charge of Eskom. You could put Bill Gates or Warren Buffett in charge of Eskom. The model is wrong. It needs to change. We can't have a monopoly in South Africa. Part of the reason we're sitting with rolling blackouts because we have a single sole supplier of electricity, generation, supply, and production. That's got to change. Opening up the market, allowing competition in the electricity industry will allow far more players. It will be a greenfield industry for the country. It will create jobs, and it will wean us off a single supplier who is essentially holding us hostage now. So if Eskom is to be privatized, well, so be it. But it's no good privatizing Eskom if you don't open up the market for other players to come into it, to be able to focus on how we can become energy self-sufficient. And other countries have done it, Polly. Countries like Thailand that have been in the same situation as we were with rolling blackouts, opened up the market, allowed all players who could produce electricity to provide into the grid, from homeowners to business owners, through solar to wind farms to alternative ways of generating electricity. And within a year, their electricity crisis was over. Here we're sitting 12 years later, and we are still no closer to ending the rolling blackouts that are strangling our economy.
John Steenhuisen, leader of the main opposition Democratic Alliance, thank you very much for your time.